The point is, economists are wrong all the time. They're wrong so consistently. But
series, Understanding Wealth Inequality and the Economy, and we're going to explain why economists don't talk about wealth inequality. Okay, so in the first two videos in this series, we explained firstly, what is wealth? Secondly, what is wealth inequality and why it is destroying our living standards and making people poorer. Today's video, we're going to explain if wealth inequality is so important, why is it that other economists don't talk about it? Okay, so the first reason economists don't talk about inequality is because of the way economics is taught at universities. So for those who don't know, I studied maths and economics at the London School of Economics for 3 years for my undergrad. And then I did a 2-year master's in economics at Oxford. So I've spent 5 years at elite economics departments learning economics. And I think it's important to understand the way that economics is taught at universities nowadays. So the first thing to say is, and I think this will surprise a lot of people, in economics departments, we don't talk about the housing crisis. We don't talk about why housing is unaffordable. We don't talk about falling living standards. We don't talk about why wages are falling, why it's hard to get a good job, why big cities are expensive, why...
Yeah, that's woke pussy shit. That's why. You got to think of lines and graphs, okay? You have to make sure that in the field, the entire study of economics, you can never actually think of human beings as human beings. You have to think of them as widget makers at the widget factory, okay? Because if you realize that, I don't know, like productive output and economic efficiency implies mass layoffs, for example, at the widget factory, if you start thinking about the people and their disposable income, their lives, their dreams, their children's futures, all of a sudden you're going to start arriving at a very gay and very woke conclusion that perhaps is not the best possible thing to do. Okay, they're economists, not sociologists. Okay, I'm just saying that it's a silly way to approach the problem. China says U.S. should lead Trump's proposed arms control effort. President Trump said China and Russia should have their military spending and limit nuclear weapons. You first, China said. Great. It's never going to happen.
Things like energy and food are increasingly expensive. These kind of big economic problems of our time are basically not discussed at university. So what do we do at university? The main thing is
Yeah, but the point of the graphs is so you can think objectively and make rational decisions. Yeah, the problem is those are not rational decisions. Okay? Is the point of a government or a social contract to improve everyone's lives, to improve the collective good, okay? Or is it to make sure that lines are constantly going up on a fucking graph? Yes, if you think that lines should constantly go up on a fucking graph and you believe in permanent growth of that sort, okay, then you arrive at this problem. And it's so funny because economists are wrong all the goddamn time. And then we never regard it in the same vein as like zodiac signs. We just like go, oh, well, I guess there was some issue. There was some fundamental problem that we didn't see, but it's okay. We'll just keep applying it over and over again. You know what it reminds me of? Okay. You know what it reminds me of? I've been watching Orb, right? And I think the way that capitalism and the way that we literally abide by capitalism being the norm reminds me of the fucking geocentric model in the anime Orb, and the way that so many supposed scientists, whether because of repression from the church or because of their own sunk cost, right, into this wrong model of thinking, chose to overlook an alternative vision, okay, and arrive at the goddamn truth. It is literally the same shit. Orb is an analog for capitalism. Instead of the church, we now have, an entire system designed around constantly seeking profit. And as everything is falling apart, as everything falls apart, as the previous models that we've designed that are beautiful keep failing over and over again, people still turn around and go, we just got to go back to the drawing board. It's fine. Let's not evolve our thinking at all. Let's not look outside of the pre-existing confines. It's just too scary. No alternative visions here, okay?
Do maths. So economics nowadays is a very, very heavily mathematized subject. If you don't have a very good maths A-level, you basically can't even get into university to do it. And then when you get into the university, it's just very, very, very heavily mathematical. And once you go into postgrad especially, it's extremely phenomenally mathematical. And it's not easy maths. You're doing kind of a lot of algebra.
Marx made the observation, which is true in modern economic theory, that vulgar economists ignore the social relations that underlying the capital-labor relation. It is the organization for profit and property rights that vulgar economists ignore when discussing inequality or productivity.
A lot of simultaneous equations. But basically, it's a maths subject at this point. And it's important to say that the maths is not easy. So I had a maths and economics undergrad, and I was very good at maths as a kid. But then when I went to do my postgrad at Oxford, even though I was very good at maths, I found the maths quite difficult. And if you want to succeed, if you want to get good grades, you really, really have to spend a lot of time memorizing the maths, basically. And the context for this maths is they basically build a model, like a model economy, and everything affects everything else. So if we cut the interest rate a bit, what does that do to GDP, for example? Or if people suddenly start spending less money, trying to save more, what does that do to inflation? This kind of thing. If the government suddenly raises taxes, how does that affect the economy? And you build this kind of mathematical model. It's like a toy model, like a kind of game in a way. We raise this a little bit, that falls, this thing rises. And that's the kind of model that is basically used in modern economics. But of course, when you build a model, you can't include absolutely everything that exists in the economy. You have to make some simplifications. Some things will be included, some things will not be included. And the models which we study at universities nowadays, one of the big simplifications is that there is no inequality in the model. In fact, it's more than just that there is no inequality in the model. There is only one person in the model. So these models are what they call representative agent models. So rather than looking at 6 or 7 billion people in the world, or like 66 million people in the UK, or 300 million people in the US, they say, to make the model simpler, we are just gonna look at one representative person. So the average person in the whole economy. So all you care about is averages, right? You're just looking at one average person. And of course, if we change the distribution, if I take some wealth from you and give it to Bill Gates, or if I take some wealth from Rishi Sunak and give it to you, that changes the distribution, but it doesn't change the average. So basically, once you build this model, which only looks at the representative agent, which is the average, which is the aggregate, it's not only that there is no inequality in the model, there is not even any possibility for inequality in the model. These are models of averages, these are models of aggregates, which is why when modern economists who've been to these elite universities think about the economy, they tend to think about them in terms of averages or aggregates, so that they're obsessed with the big aggregate measurements of the economy. For example, GDP is of course the classic one, unemployment, inflation, central bank interest rates, level of government spending, level of government taxation. These are things which you can measure on an aggregate economy. But they're nothing to do with how is one person affected versus another person. As soon as you take a model and you make it representative agent, a model of the average person, this model can't say anything about distribution. It can't say anything about this group of people is winning, this group of people is losing. We can't say anything like that in these models. So I think this is really interesting, right? Because if you want to be like an influential economist in the world of policy or academia, you are going to have a PhD, right? So you're going to have 3 years undergrad, 1 year, I did 2 years master. You're going to be doing a PhD for like 3, 4, 5 years. In the US, a PhD is like 7 years. You're going to have to do like some postdoc work. And then you're going to, if you're...
You are indoctrinated into the structure, and you have an almost religious zealotry associated with defending capitalism in this process. You are indoctrinated into a pre-existing model, the one that dominates the planet, as the only way to continue. Okay? That's it. That's what it is. And I'm not like abolish college, it's bad for you, don't learn, don't read type of person. But yes, there is not a lot of diversity in terms of the readily available economic models out there beyond capitalism. The most, like, I guess, quote unquote, progressive or woke version of this that you can get at the entry level is Keynesian economics. That's it. And that is still firmly within the confines of capitalism. It's crazy. No alternative vision unless you go beyond, go beyond the introductory courses and specifically focus on that. Post-Keynesian and MMT are the most progressive schools nowadays. Yeah, but even then, well, first of all, I don't think that modern monetary theory works for countries outside of countries like the United States of America. And secondly, it still doesn't matter because it doesn't address the root cause of the inconsistency or the contradiction baked into the current system. Okay? Like, I'm not the type of person who's like, oh, dude, this is bullshit. It's astrology or whatever. A modern monetary theory would never work or something like that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm simply stating that, well, one, you need to be a hegemonic power with sovereign currency. And two, more importantly than that, it still does not address the root cause of the problem.
Lucky to become a junior professor. So like by the time you reach a point that you are like influential in economic policy terms, you've been studying these models for like 15 years, like something like that. And the fact that these models don't include any distribution, don't include any inequality, that doesn't explicitly say we don't think.
This is so funny. Even in my sociology masters, we didn't talk about Marx as a part of the curriculum once. Yeah, because he was the curriculum. Only a political economy class I took included his text, and that was mostly to dismiss him to move on to Austrian economist bullshit. I think a sociology major saying in our sociology master's education we didn't talk about Marx is really funny because it's all Marx. Even if they don't say that it's Marx, it's still all Marx.
Inequality is important. But what does it do to a person who has devoted most of their life to the study of economics? That study has consisted of 10, 15 years of very difficult mathematical analysis, mathematical manipulation, of very difficult, very complicated mathematical models with no inequality in them. Like, I think this is a very effective way to subconsciously convince, almost subconsciously brainwash a person into believing that inequality doesn't matter. So you never come out and explicitly say like...
Okay, he took 7 minutes to explain that you get indoctrinated to a way of thinking if you get a PhD in economics that basically undermines the people that you're talking about in these economic models. That is crazy. I mean, this seems like a great channel. You guys all love him, but holy moly. Hasan, hate watching? No, I'm not hate watching at all. It's just like... I rarely ever encounter people that are bigger yappers than me. And this man he's done it. He's done the damn thing. I've officially found a bigger yapper than myself. The more important point was the data is not broken up by income.
Inequality doesn't matter. But you say like, here's a really, really complicated game. Here's a really, really complicated mathematical model that you're going to have to spend 15, 20 years of your life understanding in absolute fine detail. And you never even explicitly mention it, but the model doesn't have inequality in it. Doesn't have any distribution, doesn't have any space for that. So imagine you're that kid, you went in 18 years old, and then you spent 15 years of your life paying, locked in libraries, doing really difficult maths with no inequality, no inequality, no inequality. And then, first of all, whenever you think about what's wrong with the economy, you're going to go back to the stuff you studied, right? And you're going to be like, maybe the problem is the interest rate is too high, or government spending is too low, or government taxation is too high. You know, you're going to focus on these things that were in the model. You know, you spent 20 years studying that model. Of course, you're going to want to provide answers that are from the model that you told, the model that you've been spending 20 years of your life studying. But if somebody comes to you and says, hey, maybe the problem is inequality, maybe the problem is distribution, how's that going to affect you emotionally? What's your emotional response to that going to be? I think you're going to get like a gut instinct, which is like, no, of course it's not. It's not that. Because if it was that, why the fuck have I spent 20 years studying something that's not even in the model? And also, you kind of have a bit of professional skin in this game, right? Because if this person is right with what they're saying, that the reason the economy gets worse and worse is because of growing inequality, then you have spent 20 years of your life studying something that has nothing to say about the biggest...
It's also not that you learn that inequality is irrelevant. You learn that it's good. I don't think that econ majors learn that inequality is completely irrelevant to their models. I think they learn that inequality is a necessary good. It's a necessary, not even evil, it's a necessary good. Because someone has to be coerced to take on these low-paying jobs. Someone has to be coerced, and the only possible method of coercion is that inequality. I think that it's a natural part of the paradigm, and that it's a good thing that it exists. And capitalism actually does a much better job than alternative models, because alternative models are never regarded as models that are incentivized through less alienation or higher degrees of autonomy over the means of production, but instead alternative models are advertised as force. Okay, poor people either have to go into work and work these shit jobs because they have no other way of earning their keep and, you know, putting a roof over their heads. Okay, or if that's not the case, in other structures, the only way you can get them to work is by gunpoint. Okay. Ironically enough, we do plenty of that gunpoint coercive aspect of labor, you know, sometimes by directly destabilizing the global south and other times by imprisoning decent chunks of our population. But that's neither here nor there, I guess. That's one of the other invisible aspects of capitalist cruelty. My boyfriend is an econ major and he definitely thinks like this. So hard to have these conversations, especially when I was a poli-sci major and had a very different academic perspective.
Economic issue of our time. And you're a professor now at Chicago or LSE or at some fancy university, and you've got nothing to say about this. If this is true, you're in big trouble, right? So I think this is the current way that we teach economics is very, very powerful at convincing everyone who has a powerful voice in speaking about economics, in insisting, no, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. But the end result is, most of these discussions are just, 10 people with elite university degrees talking to each other. So it's not that they even have to really deny somebody like me who says inequality is the problem. It's just never in the discussion. It's never in the discussion. It's a little bit like, who Copernicus is. Copernicus is this scientist who discovered that the Earth travels around the sun, and the Earth is just one of many planets traveling around the sun.
Oh shit!
And everybody accepts now that this is.
He's literally doing the orb. He's doing the orb analogy. Yo, that's crazy. That is what I've been thinking about quite a bit, though, because I've been watching Orb. Obviously, he's not doing the orb analogy. He's doing the historical example of the real existing historical example of of someone that undermined previous ways of thinking and that was completely shut out from the conversation. And those who carried the torch of this research were actively undermined and pushed away and murdered sometimes for developing the alternative ways of thinking, which ended up being the truth, by the way. Okay. What the fuck is Orb? You keep saying Orb. Orb is an anime about scientific development around the heliocentric model that like under the watchful eye of the church. It's an anime that fictionalizes. It's an anime that fictionalizes basically the process. The manga is set in 15th century P Kingdom. People who suggest ideas in opposition to the teachings of the C religion, which is Christianity, by the way, and it's the Inquisition, such as that the earth revolves around the sun, are considered heretics and are tortured or burned at the stake. Rafal, a child prodigy with an interest in astronomy, is forced by Hubert, a scholar and heretic, to assist him in his research for the movement of the earth theory. Okay? When Nowak, an inquisitor, finds a diagram drawn by Rafal showing a heliocentric model, Hubert claims responsibility and is executed. It's one of the things that Hubert says that I really love is that there are no wrong answers, right? Like a wrong answer can still lead you to the truth. And I think that's a wonderful way to approach both the rest of this anime, and I'm not going to spoil the rest of it. This is like first and second episode shit, so shut the fuck up, chatters. But yeah, it's about how difficult it is to shatter dogmatic approaches.
Right. But before him, everybody thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system. I guess it probably wasn't called the solar system at that time, but and everything traveled around, including the sun. And they had developed these really complicated mathematical systems of making that work. And the way that works is that all the other planets, they have to do like loop the loops and spinning around. It's the only way that it works to make sense. So all of these guys spent like their whole lives working out these complicated mathematical models of how everything goes around the Earth. And then a guy came and said, actually, things don't go around the Earth. And he was, he was massively attacked. Nobody wanted to accept it because you have all of these prestigious academics who've spent their whole life developing models of how things travel around the Earth. I think that's kind of basically where we are now. And if I was right in saying that these guys are just missing the big thing, what would you expect? You would expect, basically, that their models wouldn't work in the sense that they would constantly generate.
And it's funny because, like, it's obvious that the models don't work. If the models fucking worked, then we would not have a boom-bust cycle. We would not have, like, great great periods of economic downturn. Like, that's the other part of this, which is that, like, when economic predictions fail, and they do quite frequently, it's not exactly invisible either. You immediately feel the long-lasting, tangible impact. But because we are so dogmatic in our approach to capitalism, and it's such a wrong answers lead you to the truth. Is that how you cope with getting absolutely cooked by the debate master Jordan Lee Peterson? Jesse Lee Peterson, yes. Anyway. I fear that in times of instability, a lot of people operate in cultish ways and approach the subject by reaffirming their loyalty to the previous dogmatic ways of thinking. Dude, I love Richard Wolff. He's great, but I'm not going to listen to him talk about the dialectic of work for an hour, dude. What are we talking about? Calm down, okay? This is already long enough. Many chatters already left because they said they were fucking bored. And now you want me to listen to Richard Wolff for an hour? Like, come on. Lock in.
Incorrect predictions. And that is exactly what happens. These guys consistently generate incorrect predictions. So, I've spoken about it many times on this channel, and I'll speak about it on the next video on the course. My job was to predict interest rates. And interest rates modern economists are basically obsessed with interest rates. Before 2008, they basically thought you could solve pretty much any modern economic problem by just making sure you get that interest rate right. And if you look at the way that our economists react to financial crises and economic crises, how do they...
Guys, once again, I'm going to repeat this, but I know better than you do on what carries the attention of 30,000 individuals, okay? Please stop. Like, this already is close to the boundaries of what is allowed on this broadcast. We've probably passed that boundary from my own estimation, okay?
They react to 2008 slash the interest rate. How did they react to COVID slash the interest rate? How did they react to the inflationary spike after COVID? Rocket the interest rate up. This is basically where our economists sit at the moment, which is the way to deal with any economic crisis is to manipulate the interest rate. So the interest rate is like their key tool that they use, basically. And yet, what are their predictions for their own interest rate like? So I was a freshman interest rate trader from 2008 until 2014. In 2008, after the financial crisis, interest rates were slashed to zero in basically the whole of the rich world. Nobody predicted that. That was a surprise. And because they believe that low interest rates are very economically stimulative, they thought that rates would come up again the next year. They didn't. They then said in 2009, well, we're wrong this year, but rates will come up next year. They didn't. In 2010, they said rates go up in 2011. They didn't. And they continued to predict rates to go up every single year up until 2020 in the middle of COVID. Every single one of those predictions were incorrect. And then they finally said in the midst of COVID, now inflation is so low and will stay so low for so long, interest rates will never go up again. And interest rates immediately went up to 5-6%. So, I know when I come out and say inequality is the big thing, and you live in a world full of economists that say, oh, the problem is things to do with the interest rate, things to do with levels of government spending, things to do with levels of taxation, I can sound like a bit of a quack, basically. Why is this guy saying the problem is one thing when all of these prestigious elite economists aren't mentioning it? Well, they're an educational system which never talks about it, and their predictions are constantly wrong. Whereas if you look at my predictions and,
The same goes for foreign policy as well. If you're a constant naysayer of like American imperialism, the one time where your prediction might be incorrect, maybe let's say you're Noam Chomsky and you talked about the Khmer Rouge and said, hold on, let's wait for official data to come out. They'll constantly bring that up 60 years later, okay? Or let's say you're a dumbass Twitch streamer who said, Russia would never invade Ukraine. They'll constantly bring that up. You can be wrong all the time, on the other hand, as long as you are wrong alongside a pro-American imperialist position. The one time where you're wrong, on the other hand, against the American imperialist position, everyone will constantly look to that and constantly point to that to try and fucking undermine your very accurate assessment of the situation time and time again. Look no further than every single pro-Israel content creator, okay? Look no further than every single pro-Israel content creator. Every step of the way, pro-Israeli accounts that are in legacy publishers or that are in independent media have been wrong on every account. Their assessment was incorrect. Their analysis was totally wrong. And every single thing that they said about the potential, about the future of this conflict was incredibly wrong. I, on the other hand, was right every step of the way. And it's not because I have some crazy fucking future sight or whatever. It's because I was looking at previous actions. But it does not matter that they were wrong every step of the way, because they were wrong in the correct way. Okay? That's it. They were wrong in a way where it corresponded to the overall biases that a lot of other people are being socially conditioned into believing. Okay? That's it. The reason why I brought up this analogy, which is somewhat self-serving, is because the same thing happens in the field of economics. Okay? Gotta call this white guy wrong in our post-DEI? What are you talking about? Okay, man, calm down. Take an hour off, Take a breather. The point is, economists are wrong all the time. They're wrong so consistently, but they're wrong within the confines of permissible, the permissible concepts. They're wrong within the confines of, they're wrong in favor of being pro-capitalism. And if you're wrong when you're pro-capitalism, then that's fine. It's, you know, some people get stuff wrong all the time. They're a part of the in-group. Okay? That's it.
I correctly predicted interest rates after the 2008 crisis, but I've also correctly predicted things on this channel. If you go back and look at the first video on this channel, which we'll link in the description, I predicted in the beginning of COVID there would be an inflationary crisis, cost of living crisis, a huge spike in the stock price, the gold price, house prices, and a huge increase in inequality.
I'll give you one example, okay? Famines under socialist developing nations that want to abide by a socialist model are considered death campaigns directly caused to kill as many people as possible, okay? Regardless of what the material conditions in that country looks like, regardless of famines being a widespread problem at that point in time all around the globe, okay? It's never simply mismanagement. Although we have an abundance of food now with technological improvements, okay, there are still 14 million people that die due to famine-related issues every single year under a global capitalist structure. But why do those people die? It's not because of the system. It's not because of mismanagement when we have abundance. It's actually the individual's fault. Okay? Even when famine is man-made, deliberately created to kill people with the intent to kill people, if it is done by a capitalist superpower, then it's still not the same degree of immorality of that is mismanagement under a socialist form of governance. Okay? Okay, it's not 14 million, it's 9 million every year now. My apologies. Well, at least in 2021 it was. In World of Wealth, 9 million people die every year from hunger. Okay? So what else is wrong? Science, history, academic fields filled with the smartest people in the world who have dedicated millions of hours to studying it. You sound like a right-winger denying experts. Wait, what? Brother, this is one field, and I'm saying that we have a dogmatic approach. There are alternative models out there, and we purposefully refuse to look at it out of the fear that it would undermine the current order of business in a way that is not dissimilar to previous dogmatic approaches to ways of thinking that we now understand is wrong. There's someone who is, there are a lot of powerful individuals who are slated to make money this way. They do not want to disrupt the existing hierarchy. The fastest growth in history of humanity were Soviet Union and China. Sorry, chatters, these are just facts. I mean, it's true. I'm also using analogies that pertain to your modern day existence that you can look at, because inequality exists everywhere. Okay? That's why I use the example of the neighborhood in West Virginia versus neighborhood in Connecticut. I'm using analogies that you can also comprehend. You can extrapolate from the existing inequality that you can see with your own two eyes, or inequality that you have experienced, okay, that you have lived through, and then look at a global paradigm because it works in a similar capacity.
All these things have happened. So I know it's easy to dismiss somebody, especially somebody who doesn't come from a rich, privileged background, saying the elites are wrong on this. But the elites are continually generating incorrect predictions. And I'm generating correct predictions here. So I think that what we have at the moment is essentially a broken education system in economics. But there's more to it than that. And the second reason why we don't speak about inequality in economics enough is because we have a system which aggressively takes anybody who is good at predictions out of the conversation. And to explain this, I want you to put yourself in the mind of a young 20, 21-year-old economic student loves economics, loves the maths, studying at loads at an elite university. You graduate, whatever it is, magna cum laude or whatever. You're top of your class, and then you have to decide what you want to do with your life. So if you want to be in this conversation, if you want to be an academic, or if you want to be advisor to government, or if you want to work in public policy, you have to stay in academia. You can't just do an undergrad. You're going to have to do a master's. It's going to cost you a lot of money. You're going to do a PhD. You're going to have to work, spend money, locked in libraries. If you're lucky, you might start making money in your mid-30s. Or
9 million people dying out of 8 billion is nothing. If we're being nitpicky, is crazy, dude. It's not 9 million people dying because famine is still obviously fucking widespread and a problem that we haven't solved. It's 9 million people dying from hunger out of 8 billion at a time of abundance. Okay? This cannot be seen as anything but an act of sheer cruelty. The only problem here is that it is not profitable. Okay? It's simply not profitable. That's it. It's a logistics problem. That's a crazy way to approach 9 million people dying every year. That's incredible. If you can cast aside 9 million people dying every year, then honestly, you can agree to a lot of stuff, A post-Keynesian Marxist-leaning economist was said to be wrong about sellers' inflation where prices rise because of short-term profit-seeking. What if we're thinking about inflation all wrong? Isabella Weber's heterodox ideas about government price controls are transforming policy in the United States and across Europe. Your window is closing. No, it's not. You've read your last free article, you freeloader. 8 billion people don't die every year. Wait, what? Yeah, they don't. I agree. The entire population of the planet don't die every year. You've read your last free article, bucko.
Or you can go into the city. Not only does it pay you way, way, way more, but it gives you the opportunity to prove, look, I'm good because I can make predictions. And academia doesn't really care if you can make good predictions. So one thing which was really clear to me in my time in the city and my time in academia is if you're really, really good, you want to be in the city. Because if you're making good predictions, you will be recognized, you'll be paid, and everybody will know that is the guy over there who is right, because they're really aggressively analyzing who is the guy who's making good predictions. They're tracking that and they're paying that.
But if the field of economics is so bad and gets everything wrong, then why do corporations and institutions crave elite economists so much? Wait, what? Dude, I don't think you understand. They are operating within the confines of the pre-existing system. Yes. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. That's the entire point of his video, by the way. Like, you misunderstood the entire point of the video from an econ expert, by the way. This is a person who does have the qualifications that you demand. And your reaction to this, your immediate antagonistic reaction to this is ironically the point that he's also making, which is that any kind of heterodox thinking is immediately cast aside by those who have obviously sunk a lot of time into thinking this way, and even those who have sunk no time into this way, but have basically decided through all of the social conditioning that this is the best possible fucking way of going forward. That's it. Also, I think you're mistaken like economists for, quants or like actual math majors who I think even have a more soulless approach to the process somehow.
Whereas when I went back to academia in 2017, I had, my first lecture at Oxford, and it was about interest rates. And I thought, this is really interesting, right? This is the thing which we've predicted really badly for 10, 15 years. This is the specific area I worked in. This is the area I'm an expert on. It's really interesting, right? If you are at elite university and you're studying something really important, and we've been wrong about it for at that time it was 10 years, now it's more like 15 years. This is interesting, right? This is kind of an unsolved problem. If there's a thing that we're really bad at, we can work out why we're bad at it. So I went to the professor, I said, why do you think we've been wrong about interest rates for 10 years? And he said, no, we always knew interest rates would stay zero, which is, categorically wrong. And I went back and I showed him the data and I said, look, you've actually been wrong for 10 years. And he said, oh, that's interesting. It never went anywhere. So what this shows is, if you're good at predicting, which means you're good at working out why other people are wrong, the city will pay you. Academia won't even notice. It won't even notice. So what does this tell you about academia's ability to improve? If these guys are able to be wrong year after year after year after year for 10 years and not even notice, they're not going to improve. They're not going to improve, basically. So what you have is a situation where anyone who is good and wants to make money is aggressively paid to leave. And if you're good and you stay, even if you are able to correctly identify an area where everyone is consistently wrong, they don't really care and they're not going to listen. So what kind of person stays in academia when they know that if they're good, they will do much better and get paid much better leaving academia and going into finance? Basically, people from rich families. It doesn't make sense to do that if you're not from a rich family. If you have the option, I made millions of pounds in the city, and that is what paid for this flat. And when my brother needed to buy a house, I helped him. My sister's trying to buy a house, I'm helping her. People from ordinary families cannot afford to make that choice if they're good. So the kind of people who stay in academia, you need to be either not good enough to get into finance, from a rich family, or basically a little bit mad. And this is what happens. And
Gary's great, but his takes can be quite liberal. It's not like if we just got good economists to work with the government, then suddenly capitalism would be just fine. The system is far more self-replicating at a structural level to be changed in that way. I don't even know if he's actually saying that. Yeah, I think given that there is some level of math involved in economics, I think one of the most damaging aspects of that has been this false reality that they also mistake economics with hard science when it's very clearly not. That's it. People are like, well, it's confusing and it has math, so it must be a hard science. I don't really understand. Based on what he's saying about not needing/wanting to improve, it sounds like the idea that people not wanting to return to shopping carts, there's no reward for returning one, but what? It's neoliberalism that started pushing its view of the economy as some objective truth. Before that, it was way more diverse and everyone understood that it's mostly social science.
You have this system which kind of brainwashes people into saying inequality doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. Doesn't listen to people who are right and have who are demonstrably better in their predictions, and aggressively takes everybody who's half good out of the conversation.
I think one of the classic things that Noam Chomsky has talked about in terms of the field of economics being designed around a lie is the notion of the rational actor principle, when there is a multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to making irrational choices, making consumers engage in irrational choices to begin with. That in and of itself is a fairly simple way to attack the argument.
You go into finance. Obviously, then once you're in finance, you can make a lot of money making good predictions, but you're not allowed to speak publicly. So when I was a trader, I was making a lot of money betting that inequality would devastate living standards and keep interest rates low and push house prices up and push stock prices up and push inequality up further. But I wasn't allowed to say anything about these things. I had another point which I need to make on this. So the third reason economists don't talk about inequality is that pretty much all powerful, influential economists are quite rich. They're quite rich, they're generally from rich families. If they weren't from rich families, they probably wouldn't have stayed in academia. Economics has the worst social representation of different social classes of any subject in the big American universities. So you have rich people who've gone in to study this subject. They probably don't need money, otherwise they would have gone into finance. And then they get paid to work for a think tank or work for a newspaper, and they themselves are quite rich and comfortable. The people who pay them are probably quite rich. They're heavily incentivized not to talk about inequality, right? It's in a quite obvious way, which is when somebody is rich and comfortable, they want to keep things the way they are. You know, when you talk about a crisis of inequality, it hurts most people quite badly because wealth tends to concentrate at the very top. But there's a sort of, you know, the top 1%, especially top 0.1%, does really, really well. But there's like 5 or 6% at the top that benefit from that. And these guys include basically any economist with a voice. So economists are wealthy. They don't want to talk about inequality. They've got a massive amount of skin in the game saying that inequality doesn't matter. 20 years, 30 years of education studying something which has nothing to say about inequality. They need this to not be a problem. Okay, so to conclude, why do economists not talk about inequality? Primarily, it comes from an education system which completely neglects to discuss it, which means that anyone who is involved in this discussion has studied for 20 years without ever talking about this. So it basically indoctrinates them into believing this is not a problem. And also they have a massive incentive in pushing that, because otherwise their education is a waste of time. It's rich people, it works for them and their class interests. Anyone who is really good at this is paid out of the game and paid to keep their mouth shut. So basically they're not going to fix this. So what does that mean? I'm filming this video at the back end of 2024. We had an election this year in the UK where the centre-left Labour Party beat the centre-right Conservative Party. And I think people often think that the reason that politicians do nothing about inequality is because they're representing their own interests. It's important to recognise there's kind of this whole class of slightly self-serving, slightly idiotic, very posh, very rich economists that are holding this up. And they're going to do nothing about inequality. Inequality will get worse and worse. Living standards for ordinary people will fall, and these people are not going to stop it. So the responsibility has to fall upon ordinary people themselves to stop it. When I first started talking about these things publicly in 2020, I was writing articles for newspapers. I wrote an article for The Guardian, and those articles are mainly being read by quite posh, quite privileged, quite rich people. And I was convinced that we were not going to get positive change by talking to the group of people who benefit from the growth in inequality. So I made consciously the switch to YouTube to try to convince ordinary people they need to do something. And that's why we're doing this channel. So I would encourage people to support, keep watching these videos. I think the next video we will do on this will be a little bit talking about my personal experience and how I came to become convinced that inequality was the problem. And then we'll keep doing.
I don't get all the Trump hate. I think his hair is pretty cool. Don't worry, we're going to get back to the Trump slop in a second. I just wanted to take this brief sidestep, but well, here is Tom Homan